Well, hello, and welcome to Stop, Let's Team Up. I'm here with Ted. Ted, say hi to everybody.
Hello, listeners.
Ted, tell everybody a little bit about you. This is his first time guest on the show, and we have just met, so...
Well, I'm Ted Kilvington. Comic fan all my life. I'm 54 years old, so I've been reading comics for half a century now. My origin story is, back in the 70s, I watched Super Friends on Saturday mornings. My first Justice League was number 137 with the first Superman Shazam meeting and the end of that 1976 JLA JSA team up. So Justice League has always been my big one. I had a podcast called JusticeTrek, which ran from 2016 through 2019. I stopped it for various reasons, although I am planning on launching it again soon. I probably would have launched it already, except my the laptop I was going to use to edit the video software crashed on me, and I have not yet gotten a replacement that can handle the video editing software.
Yeah, I get that. This is my second podcast. I have a Doctor Who one, and I was going to go video with this podcast, but my wife and me are kind of waiting to get me pay some money to get me a decent editing computer. So I'm just doing audio, and because it's a little easier. So our plan with this is we're going to talk about the Justice League of America, and we're going to do their roll call up to Crisis. I looked at a list, and when I asked Ted, I was thinking we could do the whole one, and then I saw how much has changed in the last 10 or 15 years, and I said, well, let's just start pre-Crisis, and then we'll come back and do after Crisis.
Okay.
Because it was a little crazy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the original roll call, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about, just a discussion of what did you think of this character? Did they fit? Did they didn't fit? And we'll touch on the eras that they were in, the original era, the satellite era, and then I guess there are only three in the pre-Crisis, which would be the Detroit era. So the original roll call was Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Barry Allen, Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, Aquaman, and John Jones. I'll let you go for it. What do you think of this original lineup?
Well, the original seven, of course, was the main seven heroes at the time when it was founded in 1960. They were actually looking for heroes. They kind of had to scrounge a bit because at that time Aquaman had not had his own book, and Green Lantern had only had his three showcase appearances, but had not yet had his own book either. So he was very new at that time. But still, I've always thought that the foundation of the Justice League is supposed to be the biggest and best heroes of the DC universe. As long as they include at least some of them, I think they usually do okay.
Yeah, I agree. And this is a pretty good lineup. And for me, because my first issue was 100, the JSA Seven Soldiers crossover. So I didn't know really John Jones until he came back, and mostly because he became the cornerstone of the first probably 10 years of post-Crisis. He was the anchor.
Yeah, he was. I had read aside from his appearance in JLA 200. I had only read one John Jones or Justice League story with John Jones, two, I guess. It was after I read the JLA 137. Somebody gave me a copy of JLA number 93, which reprinted two of the early JLA stories from like 62, 63. And that was when I first was introduced to both John Jones and Snapper Carr. And, I was wondering, like, what the heck is going on here? Who's this green guy?
Yeah.
And of course, at that time, I was like 9 years old. But Yeah, I hear people talk about how comics were so confusing, but when I was thrown concepts like, multiple Earths or, this green alien, I wasn't confused. I just wanted to learn more.
I'm kind of the same way because I have an older brother who's 10 years older than me, and he gave me comics so I would leave him alone. And especially my dad got back from Vietnam, and he was transferred to the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, so he could get his PhD. But we had to drive in a Ford station wagon with 4 kids from San Diego to San Francisco to New York to see family, and then there. So I was 5, so my 15-year-old brother was just handing me comics so I'd leave him alone. And he continued to do that almost my life until I moved away. And so from about 100, I didn't get to see more of John Jones until the 100-page Giants, which were I during COVID I bought most. I think I have all the Justice Leagues and most of the Legion ones, because that's where I got my love of Justice Society kind of got. I mean, I like the annual team-ups, but it was those, they would reprint that or a Seven Soldiers of Victory comic or something, and a Silver Age, an earlier Justice League. But I think I'm more a satellite era kid, because by then, they were in most of the ones I was reading, they were in the satellite. I like this lineup. I think the book works best when you have most of these characters or and I'll say they're replacements, because I think Wally's a good member, Hal's Kyle. I didn't mind Kyle. I'm a big Kyle guy. He's my Lantern. I have a softer spot for Wally and Kyle, but you always have to have the big guns, and I kind of like that. And what I liked too, when I finally went back and read, I had the showcases, and then I had the archives for a while. I sold them, but as I got to go back and read these, I kind of liked the fact that when you read a Justice League story back then, you didn't have to have everybody in the comic. You would have 5 or 6 of them.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the strengths of the satellite era Justice League, is while they had a large a roster, they never tried to make a regular thing of having them all together. You would almost always have either Superman or Batman in the story, but you didn't need to have both. No. And so it was just good that you could pick and choose, and you had that variety there from issue to issue.
Yeah, and I liked that. I liked it. And every once in a blue moon, you would have an odd little story, especially when Englehart was writing it. He'd do a weirder. I kind of like he wouldn't have any of them, and he'd have a story with just 4 people doing something. So the next new member, which is in Justice League 4, was my favorite DC character until I cheated on him and fell in love with Starman. I've become, but it's Ollie Queen, Green Arrow, the original Green Arrow. I liked when he joined. That's a story I kind of remember, and I think he's a good fit because, especially post O'Neill and Adams, that he's kind of like the anti-establishment guy on the team.
Yeah. In the 60s, he, of course, had his original Robin Hood style costume, and he didn't really have any personality.
Yeah.
But then after O'Neill and Adams got into him, and they gave him a personality, plus of course the new costume, that's when he definitely became an interesting character. And I will forgive you for cheating on him with Starman, because if you recall the timeline, Starman came out in late '94, and in mid '95 they actually killed off Ollie Queen in the main series. So
that's right.
So he was dead. You were a widower. You're grieving.
I do like him. I try to read him every once in a while, and there are eras of Green Lantern Green Arrow that I don't really like, but as long as you write him consistently, and he's a fun character. He still is. My favorite Marvel guy was Hawkeye. I had something about the anti-establishment guys and the bows and arrows, and I like the non-powered hero. Here is this guy who is fighting along. Sorry, we have motorcycle clubs that drive down Monument Avenue every night. That he's just, even though Batman is just a regular guy in a costume, there's something about Batman that, but that he's with these guys, and I think he brings them down to earth a little bit.
Yeah.
And he's just a great character. And I actually do kind of like the original Robin Hood costume. I have a thing for 60s, 40s, 50s. I think some of the costumes in the 40s and 60s they're kind of like the gold standard for me.
Yeah, I don't mind the Robin Hood costume. While I prefer the look of the Bronze Age Green Arrow, I must say that it was a very silly concept to think that Green Arrow and Oliver Queen had the exact same unusual facial hair, and no one could recognize them.
Yeah, didn't they at some point just say he gave up on having a secret identity?
At some point they did. I'm not sure when they started that, though.
Yeah, I think that might have been post-Grell, or there were some 80s and 90s runs of Green Arrow that was very nice. So let's go on. The next one is Ray Palmer, the Atom. He was one of my favorites in this era. I thought he had that neat power of being able to travel over the phone lines, and and I kind of liked when they had him in. And he always seemed to have a good personality. I don't think I've read a lot of Atom solo stuff. Maybe a handful.
Yeah, I haven't read much of it either. The thing, coming of age, of comic reading age in the late 70s, thing that always struck me was the Super Team family stories, where he was on that quest to save Jean Loring. That 4-issue arc where they had there. And that was definitely a good one. You really got to see his character get put through the emotional ringer in that one. Certainly more so than most Justice League stories.
Yeah, I read the trade that's in for I was on Fantastic Comic Fan with Ron Hubbard, and my brother had gotten those giant. He loved those big comics. He always got the giant size Superman family, Batman family, because he thought there was if you only got so much money for a comic, and that's when they were like 25-30 cents for those big things, or 40 cents, and they were a good one. And when I read that trade recently, only like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I forgot how good that Super Team Family arc was. It was a really strong Jerry Conway comic. And I agree with you. I think that's kind of where I think his personality for me is cemented, and just gave him more to do and just fleshed him out by just giving him an arc that had some ramifications to it instead of
because definitely.
I mean, there's a joy to Silver Age comics that you could read a single issue and be entertained, but sometimes there's always the great reset that nothing they did has any effect down the line.
Right.
So I liked ones where I like to see that there's a cause and effect, that if a character's gone through something big, that it changes them. It doesn't have to change them a lot, but a little bit, and that you can take back to it. Next up is Hawkman. This would be the pre-crisis. It would be Cater Hall, the policeman from Thanagar. I'm more a fan of the Golden Age Hawkman, and I think that's just because I have such a love for the Justice Society. But I do appreciate he kind of changed at some point when I was a kid. He got a little more, because they made him and Ollie rivals. He was pretty much just a straightforward, straight-shooting police officer from space, but then they made him a little more conservative, or
Yeah,
Entrenched would be maybe a better term.
yeah, and of course, in the early 70s, especially after Vietnam and Watergate, it was a good, I guess, a character set to play the hippie Green Arrow against the conservative establishment Hawkman.
Yeah.
So, and literally, of course, what do they call the establishment authoritarian types? They call them hawks. So,
Oh, I didn't even think about that analogy. Yes. But I kind of like that because certain writers would play into it. I think Len Wein, I'm thinking when I'm doing some of the stories, I'm thinking maybe during his run, and I'm a
yeah.
big fan of his run. What was it, 15? It's only like 15 issues long, but it's so good.
Definitely, definitely. I know. Yeah, he after O'Neill left, there was one issue by Robert Kanigher and then a bunch by Michael Fleischer or Mike Friedrich, one of the two.
Both of them, I think. I think you got to mix and match.
And I've reread those, but I didn't really care for them. But when Len Wein came on with number 100, that was like night and day compared to the previous 20 issues.
Yeah.
And yeah,
it's really solid. And there's a lot there. When we get to certain characters, he brought in certain characters that became my favorites in that era. All right, on this list it has Metamorpho listed, but he didn't accept. So they have the little notation in this list that he was offered membership and he said no, but I'll be a standby. And he does guest star in a couple stories, but not many.
Yeah, he didn't join till I think it was Justice League Europe, I think.
Yeah, this has him as
89.
Justice League of America 42, but I think that's post-crisis Justice League of America 42.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the issue. The Silver Age JLA number 42 was when they did offer him membership, but he turned him down because he said he didn't want to be a superhero. He was just some normal guy who had this freak condition. Yes, it came with powers, but he would give up those powers in an instant to be a normal guy again. So that's why he just went back to being, or he would prefer not to be, a superhero, because then they might rely on him to be his powers, and he was just trying to get rid of those powers.
Yeah. He's a character I always liked, and I read a lot of that solo. My brother was a big fan of Ramona Fraden, so those comics were a big part of our house. He does appear in 100 through 102 because they bring in everybody for that. It's a lot of characters in that, folks. If you've never read that crossover, one, it is very crowded, but it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, my first JLA was the 76 JLA JSA team up, but certainly I think 100 to 102 was the best of the team up, certainly between the 76 and the original one in 63, the first Crisis on Earth 1 and Crisis on Earth 2. Doesn't mean that I think the others were bad, but I just think that the 100 to 102 was, first it was the first three-parter, and he threw in not only the JLA and JSA, but it was the first time they brought in other heroes like Metamorpho and Zatanna.
Yeah, it is. I think it's the quality of the writing, and I think because this was something that happened every year for 2 months or 1 month when they did some certain issues. During the 100-page Giant era, that was just a single issue.
Yeah.
But some of them are very good. Some of them are entertaining, and there are a couple that are just. I listened to the Earth 2 podcast, and they've done a couple recent ones that are just kind of like. I think the two where Robin shows up in the Robin Batman hybrid costume on Earth 2 are not the greatest. One of them is by not Mike Friedrich, but oh god, I'm blanking. You just said his name.
Fleischer.
Fleischer, yeah, and it's not very good. It's not very good. But most of them, I'm a big fan of the Earth X one. I kind of like that one, but that's because it had Red Tornado in it. So anytime Red Tornado plays a big part, I'm happy camper.
Yeah, that one I read the 72 team up, the 100 to 102 back in the 80s when they reprinted it in DC Special Blue Ribbon Digest.
Oh yeah.
The 73 one, where they went to Earth X with the Freedom Fighters, I hadn't seen or read until I bought it probably in the late 90s. So it was good. It was just I never read it as a kid. I never found it.
Yeah. I've been guesting on the World on Fire All-Star Squadron. We've been covering the Freedom Fighters solo, their book from the 70s. Or I guess it was still 70s. So I like that one because that's one of the earlier comics my brother gave me. But 101 through 102 are just, you can't be. I mean, I don't know. I don't think I can pick a favorite because I do like the original one because I remember when I found those and I finally bought those as a kid in high school. I found 25 and 26?
For the first one?
Yeah.
I think it was 21 and 22.
Yeah. Okay. And I remember, and that's been reprinted so many times. And I bought all those Crisis on Infinite, or all the Crisis, where all the trades with all those in them and the team ups.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great. So next is Black Canary. So pre-Crisis, she is the Golden Age until.
Yeah, I think it was 83 when they did the story that they said that the Justice League Black Canary was not the Justice Society Black Canary, but instead she was the daughter.
Yes.
So that was back in 83. But by, I think it was 1990, they had, in the post-crisis, they just did away with that and said that whole story arc where the daughter thought she was the mom, and they just said that the daughter was just a member of the JLA, and there was never.
Oh, that's right. She replaces Wonder Woman in the origin.
Right.
All right. I didn't mind that. That was one of the. There's a lot of post-crisis stuff where they didn't plan things, but that was okay. If you're going to do a quick, easy fix, because she becomes a big linchpin to the team.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when she joins in issue 74, there's no Wonder Woman.
Right, and I remember I was reading in the JLA issue of that 70s magazine, Amazing World of DC Comics. They interviewed Denny O'Neil, and they asked him why he brought in Black Canary, and he said, well, we needed a woman on the team after Wonder Woman left. And he didn't remove Wonder Woman. That was done because of the changes in her own book.
Yeah, Mike Wiskowski's run of Wonder Woman. Right,
yeah, so it had nothing to do with O'Neil, but he still wanted a woman. And he also said that he did not want a woman who was just like a derivative version of a male character. So he didn't want a Supergirl or a Batgirl or a Hawkgirl. He wanted a female superhero who was her own character, and the only one superheroine who had any kind of prominence at that time in the late 60s was Black Canary from the Justice Society.
Yeah, I think she was a good fit. I mean, they do bring Hawkgirl in eventually, and she's a really good character. I think Hawkgirl in the 70s, as much as they've changed Hawkgirl in the last 30 years, and there's the Kendra Sanders version that everybody knows from the cartoon, who's a great character, but I like when they use her. But I mean, Black Canary, until Zatanna comes in, it's kind of like it's really just there's only just one woman on the team.
Yeah. In the mid-70s, like in 75, 76, they brought Wonder Woman back on the team. And then, I think it was 77, they made Hawkgirl a member, and then 78, they made Zatanna a member. So it was like, in the space of 4 years, they went from one woman to four women. Not that that's a bad thing.
No, and it's, I mean, it's nowadays, and then that... nowadays teams are sometimes more female characters than male. there was a thing in the 90s where all the team leaders were women. Like Stern did it with the Avengers, and other teams did. Claremont did it with the X-Men. I don't know if DC ever did it. I'd have to. Oh no, Legion, Saturn Girl. She was in 1960.
Oh yeah.
So next up is Phantom Stranger, who, because I read the book, I came into the book after he joined, which is 105. I've been rereading a lot of the Gary Conway stuff and the Len Wein stuff recently, and he was in it more than I thought. He would pop up pretty often for a couple of years.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier that someone had given me a copy of JLA 93. I forget who it was. I think it was like a guy my dad knew who was getting rid of his comics, and so my dad just brought them home to me. And but among those comics were probably about half the run of the 70s Phantom Stranger series. So I always liked it when he would pop up in Justice League, because he definitely brought a unique vibe to his stories.
Yeah. I don't think I read a lot of Phantom Stranger solo stuff. I know my brother had it in the house, but I think we had more this. Because I think of him as being a Jim. I assume Jim Aparo drew most of it, but I'm not that familiar with him as a solo character. I just know him from these Justice Leagues, and then big events, later on.
Yeah, he hasn't done much solo stuff since the 70s. I mean, there's been a few, but maybe like one story a year on average.
Yeah.
But
he's a great character.
He is.
Yeah, and I liked it. I saw they were soliciting a complete Phantom Stranger omnibus, and then they canceled it, and then they resolicited, then they canceled it, and then they resolicited it, and we'll see if it comes out. But I'm kind of interested in taking a look at it, just because. And I've been reading a lot of these 70s Justice Leagues recently, so I'm kind of more intrigued by him more recently. So.
Yeah, I might get that omnibus. Unfortunately, with a lot of the omnibuses, especially some of the more obscure stuff, I want to see them released before I actually, will really consider picking them up, because who knows if they'll even get there, and if they do get there, it can be hit and miss as to what's in there. Yeah,
DC, and I don't think DC's doing a lot of hardcover. They're doing small hardcovers. While they're going through this transition under the new, Warner Discovery Corporation, because they did the 2 Starman compendiums, which are worth the money because they're half the price. They're a third the price of an omnibus. But, and it's got everything. I bought them even though I have the hardcovers, because they have certain things that aren't in the hardcovers. So it has everything, including the 90s 12-issue Shade series.
Wow.
Yeah, they're thick. They're doorstops. But they're, it's just nice to have it all in one place. So after that is Ralph Digby, one of my favorite Justice Leaguers, the Elongated Man. I always liked him. I liked him in Flash comics, and I really thought he was a great addition to the team because he's so lighthearted, and he can hold his own with Batman as a detective.
Honestly, he's always left me a little flat, I guess. I mean, while he was lighthearted, he was never as outright comedic as Plastic Man. And when you have a great detective like Batman, I just thought that Plastic Man would have been a better mix to throw in there. Not that I think he's a bad character. It's just I don't think he showed a lot of potential in the JLA stories that I had read.
Yeah. Well, there's a little notation in the list I'm using that said. They're talking about he's not come back post 52 and blah, blah, blah. But that Julie Schwartz created him not realizing that DC already owned Plastic Man.
I had heard that. Yeah, because when DC bought Quality, they kept Black Hawk and GI Combat going. but they, from what I heard, it wasn't until the mid '60s that they realized that, hey, we own Plastic Man. We should do something with him.
Yeah, and I do like when Plastic Man joined in the Morrison era. But he's Plastic Man, so he's so, I think he's a little too comedic at times. I just think, I don't know, I just like Ralph, and I kind of like Ralph in, I think it's because of some of the Flash I read. I liked his stuff in some of those, his early adventures in the Flashes when they were reprinted, because he's just, I like a hero who's having fun being a hero. Because some of them, they're not having fun. They're just...
right. And that's, when we were talking about Metamorpho earlier, he did not enjoy being a hero. I thought Metamorpho was a good enough character, but yeah, if you don't want to be a hero, then don't join a hero team.
Well, and he was better suited for a Batman-led team where everybody's a little cranky.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Definitely, he was an outsider.
Yeah. That's a book I really like too for big chunks of it. So next up is a character that for some reason as a kid I really fell in love with right away. It's Red Tornado, who was a new character when he first appeared, using the name of an old comedic hero character, Ma Hunkel, the Red Tornado.
Yeah.
And he was their answer to. I think he's really an answer to the Vision.
Actually, if I recall my timeline correctly, they both appeared within a month or two of each other.
So it could just been is one of those things where it's a happy accident. They both decided at the same time.
Yeah, both the Justice League team, Gardner Fox and Julia Schwartz, and then the Avengers team, which would have been Roy Thomas and Stan Lee. They just decided, hey, at the same time, simultaneously, let's introduce mutants. It was kind of like how a few years earlier, they both DC and Marvel, again, almost a month or two apart, so it couldn't have copied each other, but they both introduced a Master of Magnetism, Dr. Polaris and Magneto.
Oh wow!
So, yeah, sometimes the coincidences do happen.
Yeah, but I always liked him. I kind of like his first costume. It's very basic, very kind of golden age-ish, but I'm a huge fan of the yellow and the one he got in the 70s. I really do. It's one of those ones where I go, I know it's a little busy.
Oh yeah. I loved what Len Wein did with the character.
He did. He gave him
he
gave him
redesigned
a
the
soul.
costume, gave him a personality, gave him a supporting cast. With Kathy Sutton.
Yeah, I think they've made mistakes. I read Peter David's Young Justice kind of religiously. It was funny and fun, and I liked him as a mentor to kids. But I do kind of miss. And then him and Karen Sutton, they had an adopted daughter.
Yeah, in one of the Jerry Conway stories, he had them taking a refugee girl. I think her name was Treya or something like that.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think you're right. So I think that's it. But he's a good character.
Yeah, some writers I don't think they did the character justice. They made him, I don't know, a little too whiny, I guess.
Yeah,
it's really odd for a robot. Why would you want to have a whiny robot?
I know what you mean, because I think a lot of the times he's got to be angsty because they're going to do a Pinocchio story. He wants to be human, and it's like, well, Len Wein just made him as human as anybody else. He just happened to be a machine.
Right.
He had a personality. He had self-doubt like anybody else, but it was regular self-doubt. It was enough to make him interesting and give him the ability to have character development, and I think some people have used him very well and others have not. I think to me he's a standout of this era, for me. But I think really Conway, just Conway and Len Wein wrote him the best. And there are other times he's been written well. I think David wrote him well as a teacher, kind of like that. But David didn't have him ever be John Smith. He was always Red Tornado.
Yeah. One missed opportunity that I've never seen in a comic, but I always thought they should do, is to have Red Tornado and the Martian Manhunter in their civilian identities, because then you would have John Jones and John Smith.
I think that'd be a good one. Were they ever on the team together?
No, no, because of course Tornado joined in the 70s when Jones was off in space, and then literally when the story arc where they brought Martian Manhunter back is when they reformed the Justice League, and Red Tornado left at that time.
Yeah, yeah. But he was really good. Okay, this lists John Stewart as joining in issue 110. I don't think he's joined.
No,
he just
he didn't join. He did appear. He made a guest appearance.
It's the Christmas. It's the famous Christmas episode.
Right. But no offer to join was made at that time. And I think that was one of only 2 JLA stories, at least of the pre-crisis era, that he ever appeared in. He also appeared in JLA Annual #1.
Yeah. And that's when I always joke about that. The Ring, Hal slips on a bar of soap, cracks his head in the bathtub, and the Ring goes, we're going to leave him here unconscious and go and send someone else on the mission.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but that's a great story. That is a really, Christmas comics can be a little weird, hit or miss, but but it's wine, so it's a really good issue. And it's a nice little lineup. To change it up, and that's kind of the Satellite era, was that you would get 5 or 6 heroes, and it wouldn't always be the same 5 or 6 heroes, and then they would bring in guests. Right. So this says Hawkgirl is next, and she joined in 146.
Yeah, that was one of the Englehart stories.
Yeah, that's right.
And one of the things that, in terms of how Hawkman and Hawkgirl have been done throughout the decades. The approach I liked the best was on the Bruce Timm Justice League cartoon animated series, where they had Hawk Girl or Hawk Woman be the alien from Thanagar, but they had Hawkman be the reincarnated Egyptian prince.
That's a good take on that. I hadn't thought of that. I'm a big fan of the Bruce Timm Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. They're just tons of fun, and I think he gets more right than wrong. I don't think he really hits a bad note with that.
Yeah,
that series.
I can't. Obviously, some episodes I like better than others, but I certainly can't think of a bad one.
Yeah, they're all entertaining. One of my favorites is the one where it's Vigilante Green Arrow Power Girl. They go on a mission, and it's just a cluster, but it's like one of the first Unlimited episodes, and I like it. And I like that what's the big 6 is what? Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, John Stewart, and Kendra, and that's the Kendra Sanders version. And I do like her. I liked her when she joined this version, which is Sierra Hall, Hall with HOL, in the Justice League. She was a good fit, and it was nice to have her in there. And you could use her instead of Hawkman. They didn't always have to be in there together. It was a good mix and match.
I agree. And right around this time, just a few issues later, number 151. That was actually the first issue of JLA I ever bought on my own. And that was also, I found out years later, that was the first Jerry Conway issue. And the lineup he had in there, I just thought that was been around for a while, because there's Hawkgirl, she's with the other heroines. Because I know one of those early stories was they did like a bachelor party for the Atom, who's going to get married to Jean Loring.
I remember that.
And the 3 ladies at the times, Wonder Woman, Black Canary, and Hawkgirl, were sitting around talking about how, well, we're stuck here on duty while the boys are off having their bachelor party.
It's that's Jerry. We watch a lot of Jerry Conway TV in my house, and my wife's a Law and Order freak. And every time his name comes up, I go, he wrote a lot of comic books.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And his Justice Leagues were good. I liked his Justice Leagues. Next up is is Zatanna. And I remember that arc reading. My brother kind of collected all the issues of her looking for her dad, which kind of ends, which it crossed over a couple different books. I have the little collection of it. It's not very thick because it's not many. It's like 4 or 5 comics.
Yeah, there was like 4 stories from different comics, and then they wrapped it up in an issue of JLA.
Yeah, and I do like her, and I really liked her as a Justice Leaguer. She was a good fit.
And she was, and I definitely thought she brought a nice element to the team. And one thing I heard later, it didn't occur to me at the time, but once she joined, they pretty much dropped Phantom Stranger from the book. I mean, they never made an official, or did any story beats on that, but he only appeared once in JLA 200 after Zatanna joined.
Because you had your mystical character.
I
also like that. Yeah.
I was going to say Zatanna was more reliable. She.
She didn't. Yeah, she wasn't going to just disappear every time they were going to talk to him. But what I liked about it is they had a big gun that was a woman. I mean, Wonder Woman's a big gun, but I mean, she's Superman, Green Lantern, kind of. When you need a quick fix to a story arc or something. And she had Gardner Fox, and it wasn't Fox that wrote that story, her early appearances.
He definitely wrote some of them. I don't know if he wrote all of them, but he definitely wrote some of them.
Yeah, but she was always a good, well-developed character, and she always had a little bit more personality than others. And just she stuck around. I think she always is kind of present in the DC universe, especially recently in the last 20 years.
She was one of the characters that actually became more prominent in the New 52 with her time in the Justice League Dark series, both of them.
Yeah, I kind of read that was the Justice League that I don't think it was the greatest Justice League in the world, but it was for me sometimes more interesting than the main one.
Yeah, I agree. And I did like the Defenders kind of feel of Justice League Dark, where they would just bring in different magical heroes as they needed them. So kind of the non-team approach.
Yeah, I do like that. And it's a good. Did you read Shadow Pact that came out? I think in the mid.
Yeah, I did.
I really liked that one and that's where I kind of like Detective Chimp and Nightmaster and Blue. It was just there's these small. I love super teams, hence I do a podcast about super teams.
Let's team up.
Let's team up. But I do like some of these obscure little runs of ones. I'm a big fan of Marvel did a Heroes for Hire with, I forgot who wrote it, but it was Power Man, Iron Fist, Black Knight, Hercules. It was odd groupings. The Shadow Pack. And one of my favorite small runs of a team book is the Jerry Conway, Keith Giffen Challengers of the Unknown, where Deadman and Swamp Thing are on the team.
Yeah, actually, I've seen those books, but I don't think I ever read them.
It's really good. It's early Keith Giffen, where he's really still in that early Defenders, like he looked in Defenders, and where he's doing his spot on Kirby.
Yeah.
But it's really odd, and it's a Jerry Conway comic, so it's a little overwritten at times, but there's character development, there's plot, and there's something there's something at stake, and there's it's serialized where you could still read a single issue and get it. There's something about I'm a big fan of some of these 70s writers because they could balance that. Every comic should be someone's first comic.
Yeah.
But I can do an arc. And I think some of the greats are Conway and Englehart and Roy Thomas and Len Wein, that they really knew how to balance it all. And if you can see it, most I think most of it's on the app, and they've never been reprinted. It's weird. Challenger Unknown has 9 Kirby issues and then 5 Conway Buckler Giffen issues, and that's it.
Yeah, I actually read the first of the Black and White Showcase Presents Challengers of the Unknown series, and that's where all the Kirby stuff is, and then some of the first post Kirby stories.
Which is Dylan? Is that Dick Dylan?
I think Bob Brown.
Oh, it's Bob. No, that's right. You're Bob Brown. It's Bob Brown. Dick Dylan did Blackhawk.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm a big Bob. My first big Avengers was my first Avenger issue I ever read was Englehart's first, and then for the first third of his run is Bob Brown, and I like it. I like Bob Brown. I also read when I was a kid. He drew Daredevil, and my brother was a big Daredevil fan. When it was Daredevil, Black Widow, he was the main artist.
Okay.
For a long time.
Yeah, Daredevil is one character. He's probably of all the major Marvel and DC characters, he's probably the one I like the least. I don't know. It just the whole concept of a blind super ninja just seems, considering all the things I'm willing to suspend my disbelief for, that's for me. That one is just a bridge too far.
Yeah, there are certain that I'm a big Doctor Who fan, and it's British science fiction where they don't explain things, which I like. I mean, I like Star Trek, but they want to explain how things work. It's like it's a spaceship. You don't need to explain how the engine works. It's not that important.
Yeah.
But there was an episode where the moon was an egg, and I texted my brother how bad I hated that episode, and he went, "You've been watching this show for 40 years, and that's where your suspension of disbelief stops?" And I went, well, whatever. But I think there are times where Daredevil, when it's a straight-up superhero book and it's a little more like Batman, I find him more entertaining. But when he becomes the uber ninja and the broody woe is me, it gets dull fast.
I've never cared for the superheroes who had the woe is me attitude. They're not fun to read.
And it gets old. Because it's kind of like they never get out of their funk. And it's like Batman. I mean, when I was a kid, Batman was little woe is me, but he was still kind of a Boy Scout at the same time.
Yeah.
I think when Wade writes him, he's that happy balance too. But sometimes he's not. So we're going to get to the last of the original Justice League run, and that is Firestorm, Ronnie Raymond and Martin Stein. I had read the Firestorm comic and loved it, and when he joined, I was very happy. And it was nice to have I was a tween and a teenager when he joined, I guess. It was nice to have that character, and I think the original Firestorm is a great character.
Definitely. The whole concept of having two personalities, and two bodies, kind of fused together, was a really good one, I thought. And I had only read one of the original series issues at the time he had joined, the one where he fought Killer Frost. And then I did read the DC Comics Presents story that they did between the end of his series and he joined the JLA. In fact, it was actually in DC Comics Presents when Superman offered him or the membership in the JLA. And then when Conway wrote that story just like he wrote Firestorm solo series, and then when they introduced him into the Justice League, they just said, okay, well, here you are. And it's not one of those issues where they would have the members sit around and discuss whether or not to admit him. They even kind of acknowledged that on the cover where Superman said, yep, I'm putting Firestorm on the JLA. Anybody got a problem with that?
But he was such a good character, and I think, was Conway writing it? Who was writing? It's been so long since I've read a lot of those. Conway, did he write it for years before Detroit, or did he come back to write Detroit?
He came back. He wrote it from like 78 through 83, and then he took like a year off, and then he came back to write Justice League Detroit. And even in that year off, he came back to write one story arc.
Okay.
So he didn't even miss a full year.
Yeah. So we're going to go into Detroit, which is the last lineup before, and it's the first time they really rebooted it.
Yeah. That was definitely the biggest break in JLA tradition. I guess they thought if they made it more like Teen Titans or Outsiders, it would help sales.
Or X-Men. I think new X-Men. It might be.
Yeah.
We're going to introduce new characters and have old characters mix. So, in this lineup, Aquaman, Zatanna, Elongated Man, and John Jones, who's returned. And I remember that arc because the White Martians come and destroy the satellite.
Yes.
And then later Batman comes back because Batman's a control freak.
Right. Well, at the time Batman came back, it was after he had left the Outsiders briefly.
Okay, that's right.
So it was just a couple issues after he left the Outsiders, and then he came back and said he would lead, but he was only around for one story arc where they rebooted Despero. That was the story arc in '86 where he previously had the ear to ear fin on his head, and then they switched it in that story arc to the Mohawk style fin.
Yes. Yeah.
And he was in that one, but then in the next story arc, it was one where John Jones had to rescue Zatanna from a cult, and the rest of the league barely appeared in that arc. And then following that was the Legends tie-in, and didn't even mention Batman there either.
Yeah, and that's when they broke it all up. So there were 4 new members. First one, Steel, Hank Hayward III, who is the grandson of Commander Steel from All-Star Squadron, and was it Jerry Conway creation?
Yes.
Jerry Conway and Don Heck. That's a nice little 5-issue run, and I'm a big fan of All-Star Squadron. I think it's one of the few series I still have in my long boxes that has never been sold. Because it's only been repeated in one showcase, and I do not know why, because it's a great comic. But he was more their kind of woe is me cyborg kind of character. He was okay, and he was created. This version was created for this lineup, right? Like yes, Vibe and Steel were, Vibe and Gypsy were.
Right. They, they literally made him the grandson of the first character, and he had pretty much the same power set and a similar costume. The big difference was that he didn't have the fin on the top of his cowl.
Yeah, and his father didn't have an accident. His father just put the cybernetics in there, right?
His grandfather, the original Commander Steel. His father, they didn't really do anything with Hank Haywood II.
Okay.
But Hank Haywood the first, the original Commander Steel,
just did it to him for no good reason, right? Well, to make him a hero.
He said, "Well, I'm a cyborg, so you should be a cyborg too."
Yeah, that's very good comic logic.
Yeah.
And then next is Vixen. Where did Vixen first appear? This is not where she first appeared.
No, she was originally going to appear just like Conway had launched Steel and Firestorm in the late 70, 77, 78.
Oh, she part of the
summer
implosion?
Of 78, she was going to get her own series. They actually did some house ads for it, but then in the implosion, it got swept under the rug. I think they did print it along with many other implosion books in the canceled comics cavalcade.
Yeah, I wish
DC needs to print that. They
really do. I had the 2 Secret Society supervillain hardcovers, but I was rough on money, and they were going for like $60 a pop, so I sold them. I wish I had it because it had some of what appeared in the cavalcade, which was that last issue of Secret Society supervillains, which was kind of the plot was used in the Justice League story where and that was another great short-lived super team book.
But Vixen did appear after that, and she teamed up with Superman a couple times.
Okay, I remember those. I
Yeah,
think I
so
remember
those were her only two published appearances before JLA.
Yeah, she's a great character. She's a really good character. She was good in that. I mean, I didn't read all of it. I really think I read more of the when Luke McDonnell was doing the art, not Chuck Paxton for some reason.
Yeah, Chuck Patton was the first artist on the Justice League Detroit, so he's the one most people think of. But Luke McDonnell actually drew more stories.
I'm a big Luke McDonnell fan. I read Ostrander's
The
Suicide Squad religiously. I have all those arcs. It's one of my favorite comics of all time. I think it's a solid run. I don't think there's a bad arc. There are ones I like more than others, but I think it's a good solid. Ostrander really created his own little world and kept everything moving, and is great. And Luke McDonnell's a great artist. He did Iron Man 2 when Rhodey was Iron Man, and it was a really good comic.
Yeah. The art Luke McDonnell did on JLA, it wasn't bad, but it was pretty dark. Well, it was weird because when Chuck Patton was doing Justice League Detroit, one of the whole...
Sorry. Bye.
When Chuck Patton was doing JLA Detroit, it was the kind of bright and light and playful.
Yeah, it's very Silver Age in a lot of ways, very Silver Age kind of style. I like that.
Yeah, but then McDonnell came on, and it was a totally different tone.
Yeah, it is. It is. I agree. He is very. Even his Iron Man was dark and gritty kind of looking, but I don't know. I just kind of like his art. It was.
Well, it definitely was great for Suicide Squad. No doubt about that.
It was perfect for it. It was perfect for it. That's a book at some point I'm gonna reread straight through. I will, like right now I'm doing Legion as my read-along episode once a week. I may take a break from that when I get to I think when I have to read the Roy Thomas Legions, I'll take a break. Because they're so bad. I'm a huge Roy Thomas. He's like my superhero team hero. I think everybody's kind of doing Roy post because I think he kind of invented. He took what Stan had started and Gardner Fox had started and said, this is how we'll make it a little, continuity, and there's interaction and there's through lines. You'll have the big guns, and then you'll have a couple characters who don't have their own book that you can play with.
Right.
Yeah. So I think he kind of did that first with Justice League, with Avengers, and tried to do it with X-Men, but X-Men it was too late. That book had suffered so much in the early issues.
Yeah, I did read Thomas's Legion a couple years ago.
It's rough.
And it is. It is. And,
he didn't understand the characters. He just didn't get the concept of the book, I don't think.
Yeah, and it was just night and day after he left and Paul Levitz came on.
Yeah, well, it's so different. It's I mean, I've read every well, no, I haven't because I didn't read the 3-boot, but I read some of it for the podcast, and I liked it better now. I tried to read it when it came out, and I didn't like it. And I liked the reboot and the back end of there's certain areas. After Levitz left, there's some of it I really like. There's some of it I'm like, I understand why people don't like it. It goes off the rails. But that Levitz run and Levitt, Giffen, and well, Levitz when it was Broderick. If Pat Broderick hadn't left, I would have still been happy because he was a good fit for the book.
Yeah, he was.
I think he's an underrated comic artist, and I mean he did a lot of his Micronauts was wonderful, his Legion was wonderful, his Captain Marvel. He did Firestorm. He did Captain Marvel. It's a lot of good books. I met he came to the comic shop I worked at when I was in high school, and he drew me an Element Lad, and I lost it.
Oh
yeah, it was Element Lad with the Arrow costume. I also had Bob Layton also came one time to that shop, and he drew me a Rhodey with the 45 and when he was still the mechanic or the pilot. And I sold that I traded that to my comic. I framed it and traded it to the guy that runs the comic shop I go to. He was like, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, give me something, give me a good price." And he went, "Okay, $200." I went, "All right, there you go." Because but it was nice. Oh, we got two more. We've got Gypsy. I'm going to skip Bob and go back to him, but Gypsy, I like Gypsy. She was a character I like, and I think sometimes she was used pretty well.
Yeah, I'm surprised that they haven't done more with her over the years.
Well, they did use her in Justice League Extreme.
Um, they did, and she actually was one of the best members. I know when Christopher Priest wrote Justice League Task Force in the mid '90s.
That wasn't a bad book.
That was not. I mean, I would say certainly it was the best book between Giffen and Morrison. That was the best Justice League
Yeah, I
between
would
Giffen.
agree. It was one of those. I think. Well, I'm a big Christopher. I don't think I've ever read a Christopher Priest comic book that I didn't like. I didn't. His Black Panther runs one of my. I never read Black Panther, and I read that religiously. I think he gets. I think he gets action. I think he writes comics like he's writing a big blockbuster movie, and I think he gets certain characters really well. And the last one is Vibe, which is I think I like the character. I just think it's sometimes where they're going to create, like with Vixen and Gypsy, they're doing people non-Anglo characters, and they get it right. And I think with Vibe, they get it. They don't get it as right. I don't think it's bad. I just don't think it hits.
Yeah, I remember hearing that George Perez, who obviously was the big DC artist of the mid '80s, he had voiced disapproval of Vibe. He thought he was too much of an ethnic cliche, and that he just didn't think it was represented very well. And of course, they created Vibe to as part of the breakdancing craze of 1984, which lasted, I think, just that 1 year.
Yeah.
Now, breakdancing, if you ever see it, it's not bad to watch. However, it just didn't stick around. So when you have a character based on a short-lived fad, he's not going to age very well.
Yeah, he didn't, and he has a horrible death.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because they all die except for the two guys die and Vixen and Gypsy survive.
Yes.
And I've never read that. I don't think. I mean, I've thumbed through it. Your JLA's your book. I want to ask you as a big JLA fan, and I'm a JLA fan, but it's not my team. It's not I've got a couple teams that are big. Justice Society, Legion, Avengers, stuff like that. I like the Justice League, and there's certain eras that I love. I love Len Wein's era. I'm a big fan of the international Europe for the first chunks. I think Europe's one of the funniest comic books I've ever read. I think it's absolute. When they turned it up for that one. But I never really read the Detroit, and that's when I graduated high school in 1983. So I wasn't buying it. But you as a longtime fan, what do you think of the Detroit era?
Well, I bought it at the time, primarily. I mean, I'm from Michigan, so when I heard the Justice League is going to be based out of Michigan, I'm like, I gotta check this out.
Fair enough.
And the thing is, when you're dealing with any type of pop culture, is you try to take it for what it's trying to be and not what you want it to be. So, in other words, it wasn't the satellite JLA. If you wanted the satellite JLA, you weren't going to get it from the Detroit League. The whole point of it was to be kind of a new thing, younger, more urban, more diverse, and more lighthearted. And I thought it was good, but it just did not get a good reception early on. Because it wasn't what people thought of when they thought JLA.
And comics are changing. I mean, when was the Justice League Detroit era? Is that 82?
84.
84, okay. And comics are changing. Comics we're going to get into Crisis soon. We're going to do big events. And then Frank Miller and Alan Moore are going to come and create some great comics, and then everybody's going to think that that's what they wanted, all comics. I love it when I see them interviewed or read them interviewed. Alan Moore had a quote one time about grim and gritty, and he's like, I didn't mean for all of them to be grim and gritty. I was living in Thatcher's England. I was just in a bad mood.
Yeah, and when you think about it, though, at the same time, like right in between Dark Knight and Watchmen in June of '86 was Alan Moore's final Superman
Which
stories,
is
where
a love letter to the Silver Age.
exactly. So right in the middle, like sandwiched between those two gloomy books,
Is
was that wonderful love letter to the Silver Age.
And that's what. And I'm a huge Morrison fan. I think some of his I really do appreciate his Justice League run. I really appreciate it. I read it religiously. I don't know if it ends, if he writes an ending to it, or I think it's that thing with movie sequels. You always want to make something bigger at the end, and make it bigger and bigger. And it's like, no, just tell a good story. It doesn't have to be bigger. It just has to be good.
Right.
And I think he doesn't. And a lot of films don't stick the landing. I think sometimes comic writers don't, when they're making their exit, they try to do something impressive, and they don't stick the landing. But most of them, if you talk to them, that they're, and especially the British comic readers, and I think a lot of the British comic people I deal with on Twitter and stuff, they love that DC Silver Age. They love it. Alan Moore's Supreme run is a love letter to Superman.
I've never read that.
It is really weird, but it is. Oh, this is Legion. Oh, this is Supergirl. Oh, this is Comet. Oh, it's. I don't have the rights to Superman, so I'm going to tell the Superman stories I want to tell. It's a little odd because it's Alan Moore, but it is definitely. It's really, if you were reading a really odd 1960s comic, and it's fun. It's not adult. I mean, it's not for kids, but it's not like Alan Moore can write an adult comic. It's not that. It's very imagey. It's got enough image in it, so kind of thing, because that's who put it out.
I did read Alan Moore's 1963.
It's very much like that.
Image.
It's very much like that.
I would read Supreme if I could find it, but you just
I had
can't
the
find
two
it.
trades. I sold them when I moved one time, because they're really hard to get. They're out of print, and I don't know who owns the rights. And he's so mad at everybody. It's like, dude, just take the check.
That's one thing that's. I never quite understood. I mean, one of the things, even as a teenager, from what I had read in the different, fan magazines and stuff, you work for Marvel or DC, you create a character that's interacting with their characters, they own it, they're going to do what they want with it. And if you don't want them to mess with your character, don't sell them your character. If you've got something that's personal and you want to stick with you, just don't publish it through them. At that time, there were all kinds of independent publishers, Eclipse Comics and whatnot.
I don't know why he got stuck in that groove, and why it's. I just think he felt that they screwed him, and it's like, no, you kind of screwed yourself. I mean, it's the nature of the industry, and I'm seeing something now with comics because, and I saw a comic writer, and I can't remember which one it was, and an artist talking about the economy of being a comic creator now is terrible because there's been no change in how they're paid, the amount they're paid. Unless you're a big gun with a lot of clout, you may not get paid on time, and they're making billions off of your creations and not giving you a kick. They're not giving you a taste. They're giving you I forget the term, but they give you $25,000. Oh, here's a thank you for creating this character. You're going to make $50 million, you're going to make $1 billion off the series of films, and you're going to give me $50,000. And they're getting a little jaded. And I think, I don't know, but I'm going to say this. I've been reading comics since the 70s, and I've heard the comic industry's going to change, it's going to go away, it's going to blah, blah, but superhero comics are still here.
Yeah. Back when I was a young adult and teenager, I had visions of becoming a comic book writer, but I had a couple cautionary tales. There are two writers who lived in mid-Michigan. One was Dan Mishkin, who
I love
created
Dan Mishkin. He's a
Amethyst
great
and Blue
comic writer.
Devil.
Yeah.
He wrote some great stories in the 80s, but by the end of the 80s, he was almost pretty much out of the business. And, the fact that he had done some great work, and of course now DC's, they've done an Amethyst cartoon, and they're publishing Amethyst books, and Blue Devil was going to, I don't know if he actually did appear on the Swamp Thing TV show on the app, which lasted like 2 episodes or whatever, but he was going to. And but yeah, so he was from my hometown. He got into comics. He had a great run, but it was a short run, and then that's it. He's done in comics. And another cautionary tale. I lived not in my county, but the county next door to me was William Mesner Loeb's. Bill
I
Loeb's.
loved his run on Flash. I absolutely loved it.
And I loved his work in the 80s. Actually, he did a signing at one of our local shops, and when he was doing the comic Journey for Aardvark van Heim.
I read that. It was a great comic book.
It was a great comic. I've got a couple issues. I've got several issues autographed by him, but he actually was homeless for a while.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
Yeah,
I think in Comics Journal or something.
Yeah, he did. Again, he had a great run from the 80s through the mid-90s, and then he was out of the business, and then years later he became homeless. So for me, seeing guys that I knew were talented, if the talented guys can't make it in the comic industry, it just didn't seem worth my efforts to pursue a career in that field.
I went to theater, so I went to college to go be a theater, to do theater. Hope I'd be an actor or a director. But I was also good doing theater ed, so I could be a teacher. And at one point, I was going to be an Episcopal minister, but I moved to the Deep South, and I decided that if I'm going to have any beliefs, I'm going to have my own. Richmond is very nice, but it's kind of crazy town once you cross into the counties. But I didn't do it because I didn't go. One, I wasn't a very good actor. I realized that when I got to theater school, and I said, "Oh, I was a big fish in a little pond." Where I came from in high school and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I kind of get it, and I see this with comic writers and I think we see waves, and I think some people come back, but you see people, it's like all of a sudden they age out. They discard creators. Because they're, whether the fans get tired of them, oh, we don't like you, you've done your time, or you've been doing it long enough to where they go, we can pay him, he's 25, half of what we pay you. So we're not going to give you any work, even though your books sell.
Right.
I think that kind of happens. I think, and they disappear, and they're people, you don't see people. I mean, Wade's my age, I guess. I'm almost 60. I'm 58. Yeah,
he's wrote his first comic, I think it was in the mid 80s. So yeah, he's got to be in the 60s by now.
Yeah, but he can still do it. I think Peter David can still do it, but he's not writing much anymore.
No, I can't recall the last time I heard of Peter David.
Yeah, and they're GoFunding him. He's having some health issues, and he can't pay his health, and he doesn't have health insurance.
Yeah,
and it's sad, and I think it's sad, and it's like then there are people like Conway who did a couple movies, and then he's been the head. I think I don't know what his title on Law and Order is, but he's still writing Law and Order, and he's one of the executive producers.
Yeah. So
he could retire today and just live off my wife watching it in a loop. So we've gotten to where Crisis is, and I'm going to ask you back, and we're going to do, well, I'll figure a good chunk. Maybe we'll do Crisis 2, wherever the next big event, and they shake up the universe. Let me give my opinion. I'm going to ask you. I think you could still read Justice League from Brave and the Bold. What is it? 58?
28.
28. Crisis, and I think you're going to get, there's like 3 different eras in my mind. There's the Gardner Fox Sikowski era. Then there's, let's say 4. Then there's the in-between before we get to the Satellite, where it's a bunch of different people. Denny wrote most of it, I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
And it's a little all over the place. I think it's very all over the place. Then there's the Satellite era, and then there's Detroit. I think they all hold up. As a run, it holds up.
I think so, and it kind of gets back to what I was saying earlier, is you kind of have to take it for what it is and what they're trying to do. I know some people who don't like the Silver Age stuff. I mean, primarily younger people. Obviously, if you were a fan of the Silver Age, at the time probably still like it. But you have to take it for what they were trying to do. Like, if you're reading one of those old stories and you say, "Oh, this isn't sophisticated," they weren't trying to be sophisticated.
No, they're writing for 7 to 10-year-olds or 7 to 12-year-olds. They had an idea.
Yeah, I think in the 60s, 10-year-old boys were the target audience. Obviously, they wanted them to be accessible, younger and a little younger and a little older, but 10 was the target. Yeah. And I think by the time I came of age, about in the late 70s, when I started buying comics, it had bumped up a bit to 12 years old was the target audience.
Yeah, and when I was working at comic shops in the 80s, it was in the 20s.
Yeah, by that point, that big fan boom of the 60s and 70s was aging, and they wanted to come up with stuff that would cater to them.
Yeah,
and unfortunately, the fan boom of, well, at least up through the early 90s wasn't replaced.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing. Someone asked me, and I've said this before, is people complain, and older fans, and I'm older than you, and older than some other people I talk to about comics all the time, and it's like and I say this jokingly, Crisis, people my age get really mad. They ruined it. They ruined comics with Crisis, and it's like they can't be writing for us anymore. we're in our 50s and 60s. And I had read a comic professional, and I forget who it was, years ago in an article going, "We only have you for 10 years." That was their philosophy. We only have you for 10 years. Because you're going to get to puberty, and girls or boys, or you're going to want to try to be a grown up and screw up, and that's your focus is on that and then you may come back and read it, and there's a nostalgia part to it, but I think they lost it, and I think the industry kind of forgot about that because they thought about the collector craze, and they weren't trying to replace. They didn't. When I ran comic shops, they didn't write comics for kids. If they did, they didn't do it for long, and it was like there was no gateway drug. There was no comic to get them hooked.
Yeah, one of the problems, obviously there are many problems with the comic book industry, but one of them was also when they would bring in former fans as writers. On the one hand, they knew exactly what the fans wanted, and they were able to give it to them, but they knew what the existing fans wanted. They didn't know
how to create new fans.
Exactly.
Yeah, they don't. I get you. I do. I think you're right. And I think I'm a Jeff Johns fan, and I see a lot of Jeff Johns backlash. Like he's coming back, and people they're angry because he did something to a character they liked, whatever. And you can like him or not like him. I mean, I can understand why people don't like him, and there's some of his stuff that I don't like. But I think he's writing for himself. And that's not a bad thing. A lot of people go, all I can do is write for what I would want to see. I can't guess what the other people, you know what I mean? I've heard movie people, I can only write what I would like to see, and I hope you want to see it. But I think you're right. I think a lot of the time you're writing for you're always writing for this little bubble of people, and you're not reaching out to drag new people in. I think personally, we've seen an influx of. I like that there are more women writing comics and drawing comics. I think I like that we see more female characters. That'll bring more women in, because I remember comic shops in the 80s were not inviting for young women. It could be they were not, and it was kind of gross at times. And I turned my best friend, who had never read a comic, on. I met her. She a couple years younger, and she came to the same. She moved to Richmond, and we became friends. And we do our Doctor Who podcast together, because I turned her into a baseball fan, then a comic book fan, then a baseball fan, then a Doctor Who fan, and she's still mad at me. But I like that we're seeing a more diverse group of people, and the British invasion helped in some ways, when we had Moore and Gibbons and all them and Wagner and all those people come over. And I would like to see more. I think DC has done one really great thing recently, is the YA stuff. And it may not be pure comic, it may be novel with illustrations, but it's attracting kids to read about Raven and Starfire, and they, and character, you know what I mean? And it's getting the readers in, and get them young, and maybe they'll read some of this other stuff. But they can't, the comic companies, I don't want them to, they shouldn't be catering to the fan, they shouldn't be writing for their generation only. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's another thing that about potential new readers in the year 2023 is, you're on the video call, you're seeing all the boxes of comics I have in my basement, and forget about boxes. Any new potential new readers, they're not going to be bagging and porting. They're not going to be storing comics for
they're
decades.
not going to have the collector bug.
They're not going to have the collector bug, and so you can't base your outreach to new readers on collecting.
No, the app is the app is.
Yeah.
I will say this: I had heard about the Marvel Infinity thing, where the comics stroll up. So I read a couple of them. I want to see what this is. I'm not going to read enough because I'm using them. I'm reading comics, some of the new stuff, but I'm going back reading. Oh, wow, I have access to 50 years of Marvel comics. Great. I'm going to go read stuff I've never read that I never owned. Wow, great. Try something new. But I tried them. Some of them didn't speak to me because they're not for me. They're for a 15-year-old. Yeah. But they were good. I knew it was good. I knew it was one was an X-Men one. It was about Bobby Drake, who they made gay, and it was about him and two boyfriends he's had in the comics. But it was a silly little adventure. But I could see a 15-year-old kid being engaged by it, and the scrolling up, it's like you do on your phone.
Oh.
And it's one continuous panel.
Huh.
And I went, that's genius, because a 13-year-old, that's how they read.
Right.
We flip pages. And I'm a 58-year-old man with bad eyesight, so when I do the comics, on my phone, I do it panel to panel, so I can see it. But I went, oh, that's genius, because you have a 28-year-old in your IT going, this is what we do. They're reading it on their phone or their tablet. So they're swiping up or down. They're not turning pages. So you have to turn the way it's written to adapt to that. You don't adapt how we used to do it to the tablet. And it's right. Neat. It's neat, but they're all over the place. I read an Avenger one, I liked it, and they're stuff for everybody, but they're very simple comics. They take about 45 minutes to an hour to read, which is better than a modern comic, which is 22 pages and nothing happens sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's neat. I'd like to see it. I think you could give someone young, I think you could give a little kid a 1960s comic, and it would work just as well on them as it did on a little kid in the 1950s. Because they're simple stories.
I think it would work for a younger kid who's not as jaded, but where I think some of the problem lies is teenagers.
Yeah. No, you'd have to give it to them at like 7 or 8.
Yeah, because the teenagers of today, they're
definitely
don't want anything. I mean, even forget even Silver Age, the Bronze Age stuff is still pretty wordy. For example, I mean, what the writers were still in that era where they thought they had to include captions. It's almost as if they were paid by the word, because they were all the captions, and they had to have some of that the pulp style prose that they tried to throw in there.
See, I kind of love that stuff. So
well, I do too. I mean, that
yeah.
that's my era. That's what, to me, that's what comics are. But it's not what comics are. I don't think it's what teenagers want from comics these days.
They want, and I think we're getting back. I think we're finding a happy medium. I mean, Wade does it. Wade's he's chatty. John's is chatty, and I think
dialogue they like. You know,
but I mean, I miss thought bubbles.
I do too.
Because that's how you. Because we can show you. No, that is a two-dimensional. I can't read his face. He's not moving. An actor can. If you're watching a movie, an actor's can emote through his cheekbones and his eyes.
Right.
And how he holds his body. You're going to get emotional context from posture, and skill as an actor, whatever. But you can't. We all think in our heads about what we're doing, and a thought balloon allows you to understand the thought processes of the character. So you see character development. You also see plot points move forward. So that's my little thing. I miss those. Let's go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you so much. I had a wonderful time talking. This was a fun conversation.
Thanks. I enjoyed it too.
I would love to have you back and us do post-crisis, and we can lament what they got right and what they got wrong. I think some of their fixes were ingenious, and I think some of their I think I'm going to use Hawkman as Hawkman. They screwed up because they told Jim Truman one thing, and it wasn't what ultimately happened. And then they had to fix it. And I will say this: I like the idea that the Hawkman who joined the Justice League was this Golden Age Hawkman and the legacy thing. I'm a big fan of. It's why I like John's Justice Society. It's all about. I like it when the 40s characters are the mentors, and that's why I like Starman, because you see Ted as a mentor to generations of heroes. Yes. So, but I'd like to have you to come back on that. So, you're gonna at some point you're gonna start your JusticeTrek podcast.
Yes, JusticeTrek.
All right. The old episodes are not up, I take it?
No. When I stopped podcasting back in 2019, I canceled my hosting service. I have done a couple guest appearances on other shows besides this one. I was on one of the DC OCD podcasts.
Okay.
And I was on done a couple of podcasts with Rob Kelly from the Fire and Water Network.
Okay, I listened to some of them. I bought the big Who's Who omnibuses, and I've been listening to them go through and argue.
That's some great listening there.
That is.
I actually am a patron. After all the hours and hours of listening enjoyment I got from Fire and Water folks, I thought I should become a patron. So, but when I do my the JusticeTrek show and I bring it back, I'm going to be focusing. I'm going to do something similar to what you're doing, where I'm going to have like a Justice League day and a Star Trek day,
and
it would just be focused on the comics. There are lots of. There are probably dozens of Star Trek podcasts where they talk about the TV shows.
Yeah. I listen to one called Untitled, which is very funny. But I've listened to it because it's a watch along, but you don't have to watch. But it's two guys kind of picking it apart and having fun. But
but so if you want to hear two guys, talking about the Star Trek TV shows, any of them, that's out there. So what I'm going to focus on is the Star Trek comics.
Cool. You're going to do the Gold Key?
I'm going to actually kind of rotate it. I'll do I was thinking one issue of Gold Key and then a story arc from the DC run, and then I'll do like a story arc from the modern IDW run, and then kind of go over again.
I asked my comic shop just because I love all Star Trek, and I'm enjoying what they call Kurtzman Trek. Some is better than others, but I'm enjoying it. But they're more recent. They're one they just call Star Trek, where Sisko's back, is a pretty fun comic. I want to try them. They look good. And what's the other one I'm doing? One's based on the video game, and I don't know the video game, but I'm enjoying the story. So, but I've enjoyed them. I may go back and get some of the fifth year 5 stuff. Was what they called it?
Yeah, I think it was year 5.
Yeah, it looks interesting. Because I remember the Marvel run and the DC runs.
Yeah, I mean, eventually, after I finished Gold Key, I would get to the first Marvel run, and after I finished the DC, I would get to the second Marvel run.
Oh, they did have 2 runs, didn't they? I forgot about that.
Yeah, but neither of them lasted more than a couple years.
Yeah, but that's fun. That sounds like fun. I will listen when you start doing those again, because I listen to a lot of podcasts because it's just the nature of the beast of being. I did it, and I started podcasting in 2017. Is kind of like I was in a kind of down time, and I needed something that would cheer me up, and I started talking Doctor Who, and then last year I said, yeah, I want to talk comics. I haven't talked comics in forever, and I've had a good, and I've been on a few shows. I've been on Fire. I've been on World on Fire, the All Star. I've been on his Billy, who does that, is also doing. He does magazines and monsters, but he's also doing Brave and the Bob, where he discuss Bob Haney comics, and me and him did a World's Finest, where the creature steals all the chlorophyll from plants, and it's just really silly. And Bob Haney, and they even Batman and Superman goes, our buddy Bob Haney, at one point, and it's got glorious George Tuska art. But yeah. Well, thank you again. I'm going to ask you back soon if you would like to come back on.
Yeah, it'd be great.
All right. So, folks, I just want to say thanks. And remember, be safe, be smart, please be kind to each other, and read some comics. An heroic legacy beginning in 1941 that spans time, space, and the whole of the multiverse. Journey along with the Knights of the Stars. Ted, David, and Jack. They, along with Will Payton, Michael Thomas, Prince Gavin, Tom Kalor, and Courtney Whitmore. They take the mantle of Starman and continue his legacy. I invite you to listen as I journey through these adventures of all these heroes and the rest of the Starman family here on Opal City Confidential, a Starman podcast, coming February 2023.